Welcome to Lawline with your host, David Schnurman, an accomplished entrepreneur, attorney, and legal educator. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law, business, and education. And now we introduce our guest and our host, David Schnurman.
Hi, welcome to Lawline. Today we discuss why high-powered individuals engage in such risky behavior that leads to their ultimate downfall. Our guests are Susan Lipkins, psychologist and expert in sexting, and Melinda Sarafa, a criminal defense attorney. Hello, Susan. Hello, Melinda.
Hello.
There's a lot going on right now in politics and on the news. And really what I want to talk about, first, Susan, is what is going on? Is this a pattern that is new? Has it been going on for a long time? You have Clinton, Spitzer, Edwards, Weiner. Why do men in power engage in such risky sexual behavior?
Well, my belief is that they don't see the line, that they've been conditioned to go over the line. They sort of put their toe over the line, they get away with something, and they keep going over the line until they don't see the line anymore. So when we see it as risky behavior, and we say, why would they risk their entire livelihoods for that? I don't think they've even seen it. They've gone over that line so many times that they don't get that feedback that we all get that say, hey, this is risky behavior and I better not be doing this because I might get caught. They don't believe they'll get caught, and if they do get caught, they expect to get away with it.
Is it just about going over the line in all areas, or just in areas of infidelity?
I'm not quite sure, but clearly in terms of fidelity we see that, and as Clinton said, he did it because he could do it, and I think that that's basically what a lot of people do. They can get away with it, they do get away with it, and they keep on going until they get caught.
Melinda, there's a lot of 24/7 news cycle that focuses on each one of these issues, most recently with Weiner. Is it more about, because it's a taboo and they went over the line, or is there anything else to do with the law here that really is, here's an issue that really applies to the law and there should be, all this attention on it when there's really big issues on the table that we should be focusing on?
Well, I think you have to really look at each case individually. We have a tremendous range of conduct here. On the one end, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger, who engaged in a consensual relationship with an adult. There's no allegation of any kind of criminal activity in that case. And on the far other end of the spectrum, you have Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who's accused of forcible sexual contact, and he's looking at serious charges. In between, you have, Anthony Weiner, who hasn't been accused of any kind of criminal wrongdoing at this point. I mean, I think the worst you can say in that respect is he lied to the media about whether this text was sent by him. But there hasn't, and nobody's saying that's a crime. Nobody's saying that anything that he has done is a crime. There may have been a lot of speculation about what might have happened had improper images gone to minors or that kind of thing. But I think you really have to look at each case individually to see whether there really is some kind of actionable criminal conduct that should, in fact, be prosecuted.
But I think that the issue is moral. I think that the reason the public is so interested in it is that we have an expectation that our leaders will be as good as or better than ourselves, that they will be equally moral, that they would follow the laws, that they would know what appropriate behavior is, and that they won't embarrass themselves or the people that they represent. So even though it may not be illegal, I think that there's a huge amount of emotion related to it because we are hoping and expecting leaders to know more than we do, or to act at least as morally as we would in our own homes.
But don't you think they're being held to some sort of higher standard? And I guess that's what you're saying. It's almost to the fact that, do we really care that much at the end of the day when it comes to Anthony Weiner? The 24/7 news cycle. I was recently watching a couple days ago. It was CNN was watching. They had all the news anchors on there. They said, okay, Pelosi is going to give a statement of what's going on here. And it turns out she wasn't. She was just going to give the normal statement about the jobs and the economy. So what happened? They cut off. They go, oh, this is not about the Anthony Weiner situation. Let's go back on to just whatever, moving on. And then, Jon Stewart on The Daily Show was kind of using that to show why the real topics aren't being discussed. And Wolf Blitzer, a half hour later, says, I'm happy not to discuss this Anthony Weiner situation. I'd rather discuss the economy and the politics. And Jon Stewart says, well, why don't you? And so that's, I think, part of the problem is we're just because of the taboo and the issue of cheating, which in the United States is kind of looked at differently than in European countries. Is that, I don't know how familiar you are with outside the United States. It seems like the president of France does different things, and just it's not a big deal,
Right.
Because they don't hold them to the type of standard that we do. It seems like a lot of energy is being put on this.
That's true. I think that Americans believe that Europeans allow outside sexual activity to happen with their politicians, and they don't look, they really don't look at it twice. There was an article in the New York Times that said that maybe Americans are starting to feel the same way, that they're getting deadened to that there's so many sexual scandals that we're expecting that of our politicians, and that the Europeans, including the French, were starting to actually react more to what's going on in France and what's going on among their politicians. So there might be a reversal of that. I don't know. I think that the reason that the media covers these issues is because people listen and watch, and they do because they are interested, and it is scintillating and exciting, and especially sexting, because sexting is sort of new, and we haven't, we've heard about it in terms of kids doing it, but we don't realize that adults do it. Or I did a study on sexting, so I know that.
What is sexting?
Sexting is the act of sending digital material or using digital devices to send sexually explicit material, but not spam. It's of yourself or somebody you know to somebody you know. So it's within a certain range. It's not sending pornography, it's not spam. It could be, in fact, pornographic, but it's nude or semi-nude pictures of yourself, anything that's sexually provocative. I did a study with pictures, but it's also including texts, as we see happen with Weiner.
Melinda, is there a point where sexting crosses the line and is against the law?
It can.
And certainly there's extremes.
Yeah, there are various types of conduct that could cross the line. I mean, an adult sending a sext to another adult generally is not going to cross the line. It would really have to fall into the category of obscene material, and that's a pretty high threshold, and you just don't see prosecutions for that because it really has to be sort of patently offensive and somehow come to the attention of the authorities and be something that the prosecutors decide they really want to pursue. The real issue is when you send indecent material to minors, and when you send indecent material to minors using some kind of a computer communication system. Particularly, on the far end, I suppose what you have that is considered very serious is when you're sending some kind of indecent material to a minor as an enticement to get that individual to engage in sexual conduct with you or somehow for your gratification or benefit.
In the Anthony Weiner situation, they were talking about potentially there's minors involved. How does it work if he doesn't know the person that he's sexting with is a minor and thinks they're older? Certainly you don't necessarily ask for verification of people you're sexting with.
It's an interesting question. It's not actually an element of the offense that the prosecution would have to prove that he knew the individual was a minor, but he could raise as a defense the fact that he had a reasonable belief that the individual was not a minor.
Do you think Anthony Weiner should have resigned?
I believe that the conduct shows an astonishing failure of judgment, and I think that's a legitimate consideration for constituents to take into account when they're deciding who they want to represent them. There was tremendous failure of judgment. I think the conduct was also quite reckless.
Susan, I want to ask you a bigger picture question.
Okay.
And this is about human beings in general. We're animals. We're biological human, and we have biological needs and men to sow their seeds,
Right.
and hunters and gatherers. The question is do you think all men, to some degree, are capable of cheating and being in a politics? There's a lot of power involved, or if you're rich, there's a lot of power involved, and it's just like you said, it's that much easier to do it. Do you think it's more an issue of biology than anything else?
Well, I do believe that we have a huge amount of divorce, 50% at least. In the United States, 70% of the people who are married are having affairs. So having sex outside of your committed relationship seems to be very common. And I don't know if monogamy will really exist in 100 years. Who knows? Do I think that people with power are more likely to abuse their power and therefore step over that line, engage in extramarital sexual relationships? I think they could. I don't think there's been a real study on that. My study was, is sexting all about power? And I found that people who were under 27 really sexted as another form of communication, and it wasn't about power. People, and those were people who were born into the digital age, who are native speakers, so to speak. Those who were adapters, like we all are, 27 or 8 and up, that it did relate to power, that those were people who had a need or a drive for power. They were trying to be assertive or aggressive, and that sexting was part of power. So, it is hard to say. I do think that the more power you have, the more likely you are to think you can get away with things, or that it doesn't count, or that it's okay.
Sure.
Or that you cross that, invisible line, and we all have a different line as to what counts and what doesn't count.
Sure. Now, certainly some of the things that Anthony Weiner did, it just defies imagination that even if you do want to cheat, they weren't logical. You don't sext or text your picture through Twitter or put it on there with him on it, with his family in the background. It just seems like there's something missing there. And the question is, does that question his, certainly his credibility was hit, but does it question his judgment of what he can do as a congressman?
Well, let me go back to sexting for a moment, because it's such a new phenomenon. I'd like to define it a little
very
bit
interested.
more. I think what happens is, just in digital communication, our inhibitions are lowered. So things go back and forth much more quickly,
Sure.
and we say and do things that probably we wouldn't do if it was face-to-face. That's number one. Number two is, when you're sexting, it bounces back and forth like a tennis ball so quickly that it's very exciting, and the sexual excitement is increasing dramatically. So there's an extra added element of impulsivity. And so I think what happened with him is he stepped over the line probably many times before, stuff that we don't know about. He was involved in texting, and going from texting to sexting is not very hard. It's like just one more step over. He wasn't really thinking or caring about his commitment to his wife, or so it seems. And so when he has pictures in the background, or where he is or what he's doing, he's not even thinking about those things. He's not checking it out.
Sure.
He's not looking at his background. He's just being
logic
impulsive.
isn't involved. It's impulsive.
He's irrational at that moment.
He made a mistake. He made many mistakes.
Right.
I'm not talking about him. And politicians in general, it's a mistake potentially when there's no illegalness involved.
Well, what I was going to say is that I think most individuals have an unrealistic sense of how likely it is that their communications are going to come under scrutiny. I'm a lawyer, so I look at people's email in discovery productions or as evidence in a lot of contexts. So I see a lot of what people are writing. I think these are people who never in a million years expected that I or a group of lawyers somewhere would be scouring their email communications. And there's a lot of embarrassing material in there, and now that extends to texts and Twitters, whatever people are sending out. They tend to think it's not going to make its way into the public.
I think what Susan said is, I don't know if they're thinking. When it comes to, specifically with all these sexual scandals, and there is a ton. I have a list here, which I won't read, of 20 politicians in the past couple of years that have been accused or resigned of some sort of sex scandals. By the way, they're all men. I guess, does this apply to women, Susan? Do you know of any situation where
I actually have heard of a couple, but I think women are much less likely to get involved in these kinds of things. They're more committed to relationships, and they want that family they want to nest, and they want to continue it. Although I have to say that the people that most people are sexting with are in fact women, and I'm seeing more and more sexting happening in my practice, where both males and females are coming to me, and they're breaking up their marriages, or their marriages are on the rocks because of it.
It goes back to biology in a way.
It goes back to biology. I found that 66% of the population is sexting, so it's a huge amount of people are involved.
Maybe we're too sexually deprived. And we came from a Quaker. The whole foundation of the United States is different than European countries, and maybe it's leading to these outlets. And sexting certainly seems like a huge. To hear 66%.
Right,
number is a huge number, and of course there's a lot of other areas that are not sexual scandals with politicians when they're looking at porn on their computers, or then obviously child porn, and then where legality comes into play. But everywhere you look, especially politicians are people, and they're just in more scrutiny, and they have a lot more power, and everything is heightened. But it's just that catch-22 where we attack them for when they get caught at doing something.
Well, I think the heightened scrutiny is appropriate, but I also think that prosecutors have to be very careful about making sure they're not treating politicians differently because they're famous people or because they're politicians. And I think that helps explain why, for example, Eliot Spitzer was never prosecuted criminally for soliciting a prostitute, for engaging in relations with a prostitute. Even though that's a crime, that's not something that's typically prosecuted. So I think it would have been unusual, actually, to prosecute him for that, and that would have been treating him differently because of his.
But he did get treated differently to some degree. I don't. Was there even an arrest made? Is there anything on his record to that extent? Not
of Spitzer, but of the individuals in the prostitution ring, people who were running it and participating in it.
But I think that the man on the street, you and I have a different perspective. The man on the street, or the female on the street, really, we get upset when our leaders are not prosecuted or when the law the book isn't thrown at them, because we feel like it would be thrown at us or our children or somebody we know. How come they get away with it? Now, I'm not quite sure that they get away with it because, they lose their job. But on the other hand, we think, non-lawyers think, they really are leaders, and if anybody's going to have the law thrown at them, it should be the people who are in power and who know the law and who are lawyers themselves often and who are supposed to be following the rules, because that's why we hired them. That's why we voted for them. That's why they get paid. That's why they represent us.
And Eliot Spitzer is in a different situation than Anthony Weiner, where he comes from a family of money. Now he's running a talk show and he's doing okay. Anthony Weiner, I don't know what his next step is, because it's certainly a different situation. But certainly I do see, and it is the man on the street when you see the politician or the successful person or the actress or celebrity who gets treated different in the court system. How many times does a celebrity go in for a DUI and just nothing happens to them and nothing goes through? I want to get into a little bit more about Eliot Spitzer and what happened there, and kind of what we think in terms of society, and should they be prosecuted more. We're going to break right now, and we'll get into that and a couple other areas as well. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us.
You had the best medical care, but still your baby was born 3 months early. March of Dimes research helps save babies from prematurity. For information or to lend a hand, visit marchofdimes.com. Let's find the answers together.
I feel my job is extremely important, and knowing that you've helped people out on the ground, the firefighters in particular, just the fact that they see us up there making an effort gives them a lot of comfort. In my civilian job, I fly people from point A to point B, but in the Air Force Reserve, I get to save lives. I'm Major Mark Stewart, and very proud to be a member of the Air Force Reserve.
Hi, you're watching Lawline. I'm David Schnurman. Today's topic is sex and power. Our guests today are Susan Lipkins, psychologist, and Melinda Sarafa,
thank you,
criminal defense attorney. The last names sometimes get me. Before break, we were talking about a lot of different politicians, and we talked about Eliot Spitzer, how now he runs a talk show, and potentially he'll go on to bigger and better things and maybe get back into politics. Why do you think he's able to bounce back so quickly, Susan?
Well, I think that as a country, we like to forgive. I don't think we forget, but we forgive. So if somebody's willing to come up to the plate and say, okay, I did it and I'm sorry and I'm going to get some kind of rehabilitation, that there's life after rehabilitation and that we give them a second chance or maybe a third chance. And I think we see that in the news over and over and over with politicians, with celebs, with ball players. They seem to come back. They have another life and another life and another life. They bounce back.
Melinda, I want to know what your opinion is on that. I mean, partly the forgiveness, certainly forgiving is an important part, because if these are things that happen, but there's a degree there. Partly, potentially, we don't really care. Is my question is, it's the 24/7 news cycle. Whatever happened with Eliot Spitzer, we don't even remember anymore. Like, it was kind of in there. We moved on to Anthony Weiner and a ton of other cast of characters since then. And now he's doing his own thing, and we're too self-absorbed in whatever the new topic is. and that's kind of why we didn't even prosecute him to some degree, potentially.
Well, it's worth noting that the position that he's in now is not a position of law enforcement. He was the Attorney General. He was the governor. You know, he was in charge of major prosecutions and investigations. You know, he was the sheriff of Wall Street. I think one of the problems that he faced when this scandal broke was the element of hypocrisy, and that's really what troubled people so much. Was, you know, here he is prosecuting individuals for engaging in prostitution, and there he is patronizing a prostitute. You know,
too much.
So I think the public really would have a hard time sort of trusting him again in a position of that kind of power. But you know, as a television commentator, I think that we are willing to see him, you know, have a public role again, but it's not the same kind of role that he had before by any means.
Bill Clinton. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I would also just add, with respect to Eliot Spitzer, I mean, he built up a lot of credibility as a law enforcement official over the years, and so I think that people do still have a sense that he may still have some valid things to say, and I think the turnaround in the economy and the problems on Wall Street gave him an opportunity to really come back and have something meaningful to say.
And you have to give it to him and other politicians who do come back, because certainly the pressure on you and to want to kind of disappear, you know, there's a lot of embarrassment there.
True.
But realizing, you know, the question is, do you think, to what I said, Susan, do we not really care? Is it really the 24/7 news cycle, you know, where we accuse somebody, we get them to apologize or to resign, and then we move on? The same reason where we only want to see the news conference where they talk about it, but not really get into the meat.
I'm not sure. I think that there's a variation on that depending on who you are, you know, and what you're thinking. I think fame is fame. So when you have a famous ball player who's caught doing drugs, but then he comes back and he's rehabbed, or we have a famous politician who now comes back as a talk show host, if you see him in the street, you still want his autograph. You know, a man on the street still wants, oh, yeah, I know him.
Sure.
You know, so I think that there's a certain level that we do forgive and in some way forget the details of the crime, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I think starting with Watergate, you know, the bad guys came back, you know, and they had an afterlife and another afterlife, and it just keeps going. And I wonder what we're teaching our kids. We're teaching them, on the one hand, maybe it is good when you stop denying and you tell the truth and you go for rehabilitation, there is a second chance for your life. That's a good thing to teach. On the other hand, we're teaching that, you know, you could get away with murder, as some people do.
Yeah. Yeah, and people who get upset is that whether it was Bill Clinton or Anthony Weiner or any other politician, was he lied first. Well, of course he's going to lie. He cheated. You know, you're gonna lie until the last minute. So.
But
you know,
cheating is rampant. Cheating from kids in school all the way on is so rampant these days. And cheating with digital technology has allowed cheating to really increase, not only sexual cheating, but all kinds of cheating. So I think that we have a society where the lines of what's appropriate behavior or moral behavior, or acceptable behavior, are really being blurred. And just like you said before, people don't expect to get caught. They don't expect their emails to be read. They don't expect their digital technology to be found out. So I would say billions of people are getting away with all kinds of things, but a small percentage of that will get caught, either sexting or cheating in some other way.
Do you think we get too caught up in focusing on this and not focusing on some of the real issues that are going on today? Or is this just a distraction that we need? You
know, it's entertainment, and I think that that's what happens.
That's exactly, it's entertainment.
It's entertainment, and I think that people pull away from the hardcore news because they can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
You know, in the Vietnam era, they used to have a picture, the first 5 minutes of the news was always the pictures of what was going on in the war, and it was on the front page of the New York Times, and people just didn't want to see it anymore. They got numb to it. You know, they don't want to see what's going on in Afghanistan. They don't want to see how bad the economy is. They want something else.
Melinda, I want to go to a different situation with, I guess now the former head of the IMF, and we have 1 minute left, just kind of going to what happened in the hotel in New York City. Now this is a more serious situation, obviously. You know, what are the criminal implications here for him being in New York? Is he still being held here? What are the next steps involved?
Well, he's in New York. He's been released on bond. He agreed as a condition.
I think. Yeah.
He's living in a very expensive townhouse in Tribeca, as I understand it. But he as part of his bail proposal actually agreed to waive his any claims, any challenge to extradition, and because one of the concerns was, oh, what if he goes back to France and then we can't extradite him? So he'll be here throughout the duration of the case. The allegations are fairly serious. The allegations are that he forced somebody to engage in sexual conduct against.
And he was saying, "Don't you know who I am?" And he does it all the time. Certainly it goes back to the sex and the power. I'll give you the last word, Melinda, on this topic and in general. We have 10 seconds.
I think Strauss-Kahn is one end of the spectrum, and I think we do, as I said before, I think we need to look at each case individually. Their allegations, they're serious allegations. It's a remarkable set of circumstances, and it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out.
Thank you, Melinda, for being here. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
It was really a great discussion. Again, we can talk about each individual politician and get into more details, but I think just a broader theory of kind of what's going on in society, and then the legal implications, and then is it more entertainment or is it more context and concrete, I think is a good topic to kind of let other people see and make their own decision. Okay. And once again, thank you for watching Lawline.
You've been watching Lawline with your host, David Schnurman. Mr. Schnurman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions about this week's program, please send an email to info@lawline.com.